Hey guys, this is this week's review of the X-Files. So this is going to be the 6th episode of the first season, and the episode is called Shadows. This one is written by James Wan and Glenn Morgan. So you've got really two of the big writers slash creators on the X-Files. They were involved in some of the best stuff over the show's run, and the episode is directed by Michael Caterman, who quite a familiar face on TV. I think he's one of those very kind of like every sort of, it's almost like he's worked on every type of TV show. I'm pretty sure I've seen his name pop up on Gilmore Girls, for example, but he directs this one. And the premise is that this episode deals in psychokinesis. I think with a show like the X-Files, it's only a matter of time before you get to something like psychokinesis. I think there's a certain sort of checklist with a show like this that I think they just sort of have to do, and I guess psychokinesis is just one of those. So the setup is that we have this character, Lauren. She works in an office building, works for like a supplies company. And at the start of the episode, we quickly learn that her former boss, Howard Graves, I think his name is, which is an eerie surname given he's no longer around. So yeah, he has passed away recently. He committed suicide, or so the story goes. And she was very close to him. She was his secretary, and they had a sort of a close bond. And you can see at the start of the episode she is still grieving this. And what basically happens is she starts suspecting things are kind of not quite right, and that there was something more to his death than was the story. She is quite a creepy sort of boss who kind of puts on the right sort of airs and graces, but is clearly quite forceful with her at the start, and she hands in her 2-week notice because she just wants to get out of there, basically wants to start afresh. And he sort of is quite forceful in trying to get her to stay, but she's obviously insistent. And then later that night she goes to a cash machine. She's attacked by this couple of people, and they actually do a nice little cut in this scene because you see the attack and then it cuts away and you get these two, I guess, kind of stereotypical sort of like street punks who come along looking for a place to crash, and it's obviously right near, like in this alleyway, and then they're freaked out because these bodies suddenly like drop from the sky, basically from the building, and one of them's like hanging upside down, and that's the whole setup. So basically it deals in psychokinesis. So the whole idea is that Howard is still with Lauren from the grave, and that he is protecting her, basically, and that there was a whole other side to what really happened to his death, and this whole sort of corruption type thing with the company. And one of the interesting touches is that Howard had a daughter who also died, and she tragically died at very young. I think it was 2 or 3. So there's something Mulder brings up at one point in the episode where he says, well, Lauren would or the daughter would be the same age as Lauren is now. So yeah, this idea then he's sort of, Lauren in a way becomes his like surrogate daughter sort of thing. So that's the setup, and it's not a very good episode. It's one which I think has aged quite badly. I could see maybe when it first aired in the early 90s, it may be having some sort of an appeal, but I think psychokinesis on screen is typically hard to do well. It's hard to really pull off without looking quite cheesy and hokey. And yeah, I think it comes across as too much of a cheap sort of gimmick. I think at least with the Jersey Devil episode, which was the last episode, at least with something like that, there were different things they could do with it, and I think they obviously, it wasn't really till you saw the Jersey Devil later in the episode where that started becoming a little bit on the silly side. I think leading up to those scenes, it was solid enough without being like amazing. But this one, I think the premise from the start is just doesn't work. I think they obviously try and come up with other things that are happening, like at the company, and it's just not very interesting because they come up with this like plot where it's a Middle Eastern extremist group who go after Lauren when she's getting the cash out, which, I mean, okay, I think that side of it seems a bit sort of like dated now, but the other thing about that is it's revealed that creepy boss guy has been working with this group, like supplying them sort of these parts, but they're obviously like a corrupt sort of group. So the sort of group you shouldn't be giving this stuff to, basically. So what happened is that Howard found out about it and was going to expose it, and that's when the boss had him killed. So Lauren finds this out. And it just feels like them kind of tacking on this other plot to sort of beef things up a little bit. It's almost like they don't quite have the confidence in the telekinesis plot line. But yeah, it's just not very interesting, like that side of the story, and a lot of the emotional beats and the big like set pieces, they just come off as kind of phony and forced and just a bit silly. I mean, obviously Carrie's the one example I can think of which has done telekinesis really well, and I guess that's because it only really happens at the end. You know, they save it up for the big finale. A lot of most of the rest of what Carrie is basically kind of a high school type drama almost. So I think that's why that works so well. But I can't really think of another good sort of psychokinesis type thing on TV or on film. But as I was saying, some set pieces, they do look really, really silly. So after Mulder and Scully have visited Lauren at her home, and they're obviously questioning her about what happened with the Middle Eastern guys, their car is then like taken over by the entity. You know, their doors are locked, and it starts steering, and yeah, it just comes off as kind of like silly. You get stuff in the office flying about later on in like the scene near the end where they've basically gotten Lauren to cooperate, and they then search the boss's office, and that's when it appears as though they can't find any evidence. But then Howard comes through. He actually like starts flying things about the office and reveals stuff and finds like the evidence, the documents in like this picture. So yeah, stuff like that really doesn't work very well. At one point you get like the blood in the bathtub, which isn't a bad visual actually. I quite like that. And that's Howard showing Lauren what happened to him, basically kind of how he was killed. But as I said, the supernatural stuff in this episode doesn't really work very well. It just doesn't transfer very well to the screen. I think the plot overall isn't very interesting because there's this other sort of side thing where Mulder and Scully are called in by this outside group and they're being all mysterious, like that they're hardly saying anything, and it's basically another branch of the government, but they're very cautious because the whole circumstances around what happened is that there was no pressure on one of the victims' neck, even though he was obviously like choked, and there's no pressure. So that's where the mystery of psychokinesis or of what happened like comes into play, and it's kind of like these suits from this other department. They sort of know that this is an X-file, and they sort of know that there's probably something supernatural going on. It's just they just don't want to admit it, so they're keeping very sort of hush hush, and kind of they're happy to turn the case over to Mulder and Scully. But then there's this line about, of course, if this ever comes up, we request full deniability or full denial. And that's when we get one of the best lines of the episode from Mulder, where he actually says, "It seems to me you people already suffer from full denial." So that's a great line, a nice little shot in the arm back. And there's a couple of cool horror references in this episode, as you might expect from well, first of all, Scully in the hallway when Mulder brings up his theory. When he brings up psychokinesis, she says, "What, like Carrie from the prom sort of thing?" And later on, I kind of like when he mentions, well, what if there's a poltergeist involved? And she's like, "They're here," or something, which must be a line from the film. It's been ages since I've seen that film. But I do like Scully actually poking some fun at Mulder. So, yeah, I appreciate the sort of humour and some of like the references to horror, which makes sense. I think another plus is actually the actress playing Lauren. I think is good. I've seen her in other stuff. I can't really think. She actually has a bit of a Holly McClane out of Die Hard type look. I think she looks quite a bit like her. But I think she is good. I think you can see the vulnerability in the character and that she's constantly on edge throughout the episode. I think I should stop saying I think, sorry about that, but the actress gets that across very well. And I think one of the best scenes is actually when she's being like interviewed by Mulder and Scully, and it's a very sort of intimately shot scene, and she's just opening up about, have you ever been someone's secretary, and yeah, just going into the back history with Howard, and it's a really well played scene. So I can't really fault the actress, but there's only so much a good actress can do, and I just think the plot in this and just the central gimmick, I think, just lets it down. It just leaves it feeling a bit flat. The other thing is, I think there's a bit of a goofy, just cheesy element to her relationship with Howard a little bit, that it's just played at times. There's a couple of scenes that are just quite cheeky, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, when he's like kind of sticking up for her around the office. So there's a scene when she wants to see the boss, and you've got like this kind of uptight like battle axe as the receptionist, and she's not making it easy for her to see him. It's like no, well, maybe this afternoon, come back. And that's when Howard, using his powers, like sort of flicks the cup sort of thing on the coffee cup on the desk as kind of like freak her out. And then there's this little tease at the end, because Lauren has left the state. Basically, she's gone to another part of America to kind of pick up the pieces of her life, and she goes to another job, and again it's in the office, and you get a similar thing where it's actually her boss this time, I think, who's being a bit of a hard ass. But yeah, so you get a tease where the cup starts shaking, and it's like, oh, is Howard still with her? And no, it's just they're near like a train line or something, and the boss says, yeah, this is always happening, that the sort of ruptured. So a kind of goofy little sort of tease there at the end, but I guess it's fine. It does remind me a little bit of Angel, the stuff with Cordelia and Phantom Dennis, as he's called. Her friendly ghost who lives with her, and that's actually a good example of how you do a plot like this. That's actually quite sort of charming, and yeah, that's really nice stuff. It's sort of much better than this, really. But yeah, this episode is very throwaway. It's not that interesting overall. I even think at times Mulder and Scully aren't that great in it. They don't have that many memorable lines. It's not really the characters at their best. Especially Mulder, he seems for some reason not quite his charming self in this episode. He seems a bit too cold and distant, I think, and not really on top form, which I guess is surprising considering you've got two of the best writers on the show doing it. But maybe they just like inherited a bad idea originally and then struggled to make it work. But yeah, not much more to say about this one. That's my thoughts on Shadows, the 6th episode of the X-Files. And I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Now, I can't really shit on it that much. It's not terrible. I've seen much worse. But it's very forgettable. I think it is the weakest episode so far out of the 6. So 5 out of 10 I'll go for. And that means, of course, it's bottom of the list so far on my rankings. So it's number 6, right at the bottom there. Although I think next time it's going to have some competition for the bottom spot, because next time it's The Ghost in the Machine, which I remember being an absolute turkey. So yeah, a bit of a rough period at the moment. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Shadows, and I will be back soon with episode 7, which, as I said, is Ghost in the Machine. Let me know your thoughts on the X-Files and on this episode in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon.